My name is Cody Hanson. I am the host of the Singularity discussion series. We do this every month with experts and alumni throughout the Singularity community. And the goal is to talk about what's going on in the world with our experts and gain some insights for you as part of the community. So please share in the chat where it is you're tuning in from. Zoom has a tendency to default to the chat with just host and panelists, so make sure to hit that drop down and chat with everyone so everyone can see. But very excited to see where y'all are coming from. This month, we're joined by Jody Medich, who is one of our esteemed experts and has been for quite a while at Singularity. And in a minute here, I'll pass it over to her to introduce herself. We got folks from Switzerland, Mexico City, Kansas, Dubai, Argentina. Amazing. I say this every time, but every time I am like astounded by how global the audience is. It's we have a few hundred people and it's like the widest representation of countries you could possibly ask for, so it's super cool.
Wow, just saw like two different people from Bulgaria. That's awesome.
It's yeah, amazing. Paraguay, Germany,
Oh, very
awesome.
good.
Cool. Well, I think folks will keep jumping in here, but we'll go ahead and get started. So yeah, Jody, I want to pass it over to you to just kind of introduce yourself, who you are, your experience, and what makes you qualified to talk about disruptive innovation.
Thanks, Cody. Hi, I'm Jody Medich. I am a designer and strategist, and I specialize in disruptive innovation, to take a term from SU. And I've been doing this for about, since 1994. And so I've had the honor to work on a lot of cutting edge technologies and products that you may have heard of, starting way back in 94. It kind of came by this naturally. I helped to design some of the first auto websites, because that's about the time that the internet became publicly available. And then, through the years, I've worked on self-driving cars for Toyota. I helped to develop the HoloLens, which is the augmented reality glasses from Microsoft. I was part of the Office of the CTO, that helped to vet the purchase or the investment into OpenAI. And just recently, I was at Google, where I was working on a team called the Envisioning Studio, and specifically a little tiny group inside of Google called the Wonder Lab, where we help to ideate and invent what do people want to do with AI, and also help to the deep mind engineers to understand what artists and writers and researchers really need from AI, so that it could be more human augmenting as opposed to human replacing. I also happen to be the director of design for Singularity University Lab for a long time, working on solutions to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, both with startups and big corporations, and led the central incubation team at Microsoft to help invent 0 to 1 products. So, lots of experience doing radical innovation inside of large and very small companies. So, yeah.
Amazing. So disruptive innovation is may seem like a buzzword, maybe it is, but radical innovation, whatever you want to call it. I'd love to give you a chance to kind of share what that is, the definition of that for you compared to just process improvement, kind of incremental innovation. What's the difference between those two? What is disruptive innovation? Why is it important for companies?
Sure. So there's kind of two types of innovation, and most of us on this call are I'm going we're all innovators, right? That's why we're here. That's why we're wanting to learn this kind of, from these folks that come on this series. And so there's kind of two kinds of innovation. There's the sustaining innovation, like you were referring to, Cody, that helps you to maintain your existing market, gain more of your existing market, and hopefully get you towards the top of that market, to gather more of those, you know, high-end clients for you. The other type of innovation, which is the type I specialize in, is more greenfield innovation. So what we're trying to do is to create net new markets, create net new solutions, and maybe even define net new categories of products and services for people. And that kind of innovation is a lot more risky because it's usually, you know, n- not parallel with the existing business. In fact, it needs to look at a different way of doing business for a net new audience of people, a net new market. And if you look at Christensen's take on disruptive innovation, he talks a lot about how it starts in the low end or with unserved or underserved people from your existing market and creates a net new market that kind of takes over the previous market and becomes much bigger. But it starts at the lower end, whereas sustaining innovation tries to go for the higher end of your market. Yeah.
So yeah, that's super interesting. By lower end, you mean like a lower price point
Yeah,
or
lower price point or people that are dealing with edge use cases of
Mhm.
in the existing market and they're just not finding the right things within the market, but they're willing to put up with it because there's nothing better. And then you go and you invent the better.
Right. So it's kind of a step function. How do you know what are the signs that this is kind of a big scary thing for executives to take this risk?
Yeah.
I think typically.
Yeah.
How do you know what are the signs that your company is or your market is ready for this type of effort?
Um well, sometimes you can't tell, right? Sometimes it's that there's this, a lot of times markets are disrupted by startups, people that don't necessarily know, they don't have the long term knowledge of that market or haven't been dealing with that industry very long, and they come in and they kind of break all the rules. They don't try to they don't even realize that they're breaking the rules sometimes, and so that's what ends up kind of toppling the market. And so if you're one of the big leaders in the market, it can be really easy to miss that that's happening because those smaller companies are able to play at that lower cost end of the market and maybe even outside of that market because they're not trying to sustain their market share, right? And so um, it's hard for a big corporation to recognize that this is even a possibility because they're trying to grow their market share, right? And they're competing with other players in that market, and measuring themselves against the success of those other players. How much do we have versus company X, right? Like, are we competitive there? And so it's it's a little tricky if you're one of these corporations to try to figure out what that is. But it's important to look at the market that you're going after. Where is the scarcity in that market? Where are people starting to fall off? Are you the biggest player in that market? And in fact, that's usually the biggest signal that you need to be doing something else is if you're the biggest player in that market, or if you're the second biggest player in that market. It usually means that the market your market share is saturated, and the only way to get more is if you think about looking outside of that existing market and need to experiment and see what you can do.
Yeah. Speaking of startups, I think in the past you've mentioned that companies pre-2024 you can kind of classify broadly as industrial revolution companies, while those after like founded after 2024 are AI native. Can you share a little bit about what you mean by that and what that means for those companies that are pre-existing?
Sure. So with each shift in the socioeconomic market, so right now we're still in the final stages of the industrial revolution, which started back in the late 1800s. And there's been four stages of the Industrial Revolution. And the first one was about machines. The second one was about kind of um, automation. And then the third was about computers and information. And this fourth one is about like AI and IoT and things like that. But we're starting to reach the end of that into some new market. It's going to be, I would say it's going to be a while, maybe, 5, 10 years before we're fully into an AI marketplace. But companies that were established in any of the previous eras of the Industrial Revolution, by necessity, build their companies to compete in that market.
Hmm.
And it's true that if the makeup of your company generally matches the product or service that you're creating because you have different departments that are dedicated to creating those things. And so when we start to talk about net new socioeconomic markets like the AI revolution as opposed to the industrial revolution, you start to see that the companies need to be structured entirely different because they're taking advantage of AI knowledge workers. So replacing kind of the actual structures of our interior companies. And when you change the interior structure of the company, net new things can be created, like entirely different categories of products and services. And so these new companies that are coming in without the legacy infrastructure of one of the previous eras of industrial revolution, they're naturally going to do things much differently, which means they're going to be able to produce much different types of products and services. And so that's what I mean by companies that existed before, say, 2024, that were established before 2024. They're coming from that era, and there's so much legacy of that's embedded into companies that it makes it very difficult to compete with greenfield. So let's talk about like manufacturing is a great example. So a manufacturer that was from one of the previous eras, they're still, I know that I looked at a lot of manufacturing plants and they were still using things like ethernet cables and SCSI drives. I don't Half the people I talk to don't even know what a SCSI drive is because it's from like the 80s. um, and then so when we talk about creating autonomous systems within those types of manufacturing areas, it becomes they don't even have Wi-Fi, right? So it becomes really complicated to retrofit it into an autonomous manufacturing facility, whereas
Hmm.
a greenfield, like a brand new factory, can build all of that in from scratch. And so they can do lights out manufacturing and things like this, which is just not possible in a pre-existing manufacturing facility. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's just that it entirely new processes, entirely new ways of thinking about your staffing, and your financial situations. All of that can be different when you're built in a net new era of
Right.
the revolution.
Right. Before I get to the next question, I want to just remind folks, there was a Mo left on our team left a comment in the chat to please share your questions in the chat or the Q&A function, and we will get to those at the back half of this call. So as you have questions for Jody, please feel free to throw them in there and we will get to them later on. Uh, so let's assume that you have identified that you need to start this effort, or at least explore it. Where do you begin with creating a disruptive innovation roadmap, or just taking the first step? What are some of the strategies that you've seen be successful in the past?
Um, well, there's the ideal way and there's the way that it usually happens. So let's talk about the
Okay.
ideal way first, and then we can talk about the way it usually happens. So the ideal way is that together you establish that you want to start to expand your market, create a new market. And it's the often quote from Einstein: if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes figuring out the problem. because the solution becomes really easy once you know that. And so ideally what you do is things like exploratory research, looking at these areas that are outside of your company and starting to really understand that market, and what's actually needed there, and creating um, real true empathy and understanding of what these folks are struggling with, what problems they're having that are not met, looking for workarounds that they've tried to do to create to retrofit the market solution to what they actually need it to do. And then you start experimenting around that and figuring it out. So um, for example, when Google Docs was invented, right? Sam Shalais and his team, they were this is Google Docs, no digital like document sharing thing was available. You had to pass a document around, and it's hard to collaborate
Yeah.
across distance that way. And so Microsoft had the market cornered on Word, right? It was
Hmm.
the standard. And Sam Shalais and his team, they found this group of researchers that were co-authoring papers, but they lived in they were distributed. They weren't in a central location, and they were really struggling with doing this. And so Sam Shalais and his team, they started to think, well, what if documents were a web application as opposed to something that lives on your desktop? And so that's how they created Google Docs. And what happened, because they created this solution for an underserved group of people in the market, and that exploded, and of course created huge problems for Microsoft's share of that market and created an entirely new market for people, right? And so this is what I'm talking about, where somebody finds a niche that's not being served, understands those needs really well, and starts to develop it for it. Another type of innovation that happens is, and this is more frequently seen, is that there's folks within the organization that have their own problem that they're struggling with, or they notice something in the market that they're not happy with, or in the case of where I work in tech companies, there's a group of designers, engineers kind of playing around with something because it's just fun to play around with. And the next thing you know, um, it becomes a piece of technology that they're like, okay, well, we have to create a market for this thing. Let's go create a market. So there's kind of the ideal way, which is start with people that are underserved, unserved, and create something there. And then the other way, which is let's create something cool and see if we can create a market for it. I think the second kind is a lot more risky, uh, because you've already invested so much money before you even know there's a market fit. But
Right. Yeah. Same with like a startup where you have a brilliant idea and you create it without validating that people actually want it. So it's like the big company version of that, it sounds like.
yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Except for
Um,
big companies put a lot more money into it.
right. So in that process, what are some of the common pitfalls of, what are the things that'll trip you up or just stop you kind of dead in your tracks along that path?
Of bringing innovation to market, or
Yeah. Yeah, just that disruptive innovation process at an organization.
oh, the disruptive process. Well, there's a lot that can trip up. So our companies are comfortable. Most big companies are comfortable with sustaining innovation. It's how they keep the doors open, right?
Hmm.
It helps them to get a bigger share. And so there's lots of internal processes that'll enable that kind of innovation. It's expected the company itself is able to market it because it's going to the exact same market that they already have. They have distribution channels already established. There's existing finance, and there's the legal team is able to accommodate the needs of that because it's already with their existing market, and so they understand how to bring it to market. With disruptive innovation, it's a whole nother business. It's, you have to create a net new market. You have to have net new distribution channels. You have to have net new sales channels. You have to have a different type of financing, and financial gates, right? So a lot of products, when we're going through the approval gates to get something to market, There's certain metrics that it must meet in order for the company to say, yes, let's go ahead with that. But disruptive innovation is going to fail those metrics consistently. And it's actually kind of a sign that it's going in the right way because it's failing those things. But to a corporation, that just seems like a distraction, right? That just seems like something that's going to derail their finance. And so it becomes really problematic. Another problem is staffing, right? So when you're staffing up a product that's going to, that you understand how to do, um, it's a lot easier than when you're staffing up for something that's we don't know what we're going to need.
Right.
It's net new. We've never done this before. And when, especially in the early days of a product development, whether it's a startup or a big corporation doing it, um, it's not really clear what kind of people you're going to need. And sometimes you're going to need a lot, and then the next day need none. And so you need like a flexible staffing model, something that you can call in people with their expertise and have them go away and not be part of the bottom line. And so all of these different things have to align in order for a big corporation to be able to bring a disruptive idea to market.
And so there's obviously, M&A, you go out and buy the startup that's doing the disruptive
Yeah.
innovation. I've heard of innovating at the edge or, having a different physical location where this work can happen.
Yep.
Um, are those the kind of the only paths, the best paths to doing that is kind of insulating the new project from the main organization, or are there ways to get it done, in the same building with teams mixing and I guess it maybe depends on your culture.
It depends on your culture. I've seen all three.
Hmm.
To varying degrees of success. It really depends on the culture because one solution at company A will completely fail for company B just because it's the so-called corporate antibodies just won't allow that to happen.
Right.
So the systems that I've seen work the best have a dedicated path for entrepreneurs. So they have career paths for them because a lot that's the other part that really causes issues is that the career paths for entrepreneurs usually like I worked at a company, I won't name it, that was developing a really amazing invention that actually another company, a startup, ended up creating and disrupting their market. But they were creating it internally, and in order to work on that project, all of the employees had to step away from their established jobs to work on this thing. And when the company wasn't able to bring it to market for a number of reasons, all those people lost their jobs.
Mm.
And then they got picked up by the startups because they knew how to do it and they were familiar with all the different pieces that were missing at the big corporations so they could get a ledge, a foot in. um, so I would say that the best way to do this is to make sure that you have entrepreneur career tracks where people can be given raises and bonuses, and that there's consequences just like there is in a startup for not succeeding in what you're doing. There also needs to be flexible budgets because
Hmm.
in a traditional, in a product that how to bring to market, you have yearly budget planning or maybe like twice a year. But that doesn't work for a startup. You have to be constantly changing the funding model and ad hoc funding and the specialized legal department that can deal with their issues, or maybe just one or two people, right? But you have to create kind of a special little incubator to help them go to market. The other way, of course, is creating an external team, um, like an actual subsidiary that can do
Right.
these things and operate in a really different way, especially when it comes to AI, because you're going to start to need to change the way you do business as well as changing what your business is. And so you need to kind of prototype that net new AI native way of working, so that you can start to establish a type of interior business to be able to bring these things to market. So I've seen both
That's
work.
Yeah, that's a great transition because I wanted to touch on AI specifically because it's obviously top of mind over the past 24 months. Everyone is trying to figure out how, when, if I integrate AI. And there's obviously, you read articles about a high failure rate of new AI projects. And then you also hear about folks just kind of starting to use AI in everyday work, but not necessarily like restructuring the organization around being AI native. What are some of the things that you're seeing out in the world that are working or not working, or maybe some unexpected, unintended consequences of the big shift to AI that everyone's thinking about right now?
Um, well, I think for a second. When I hear, AI that's failed coming from Silicon Valley, of course, I'm going to say, well, did you fail or did you learn some valuable lesson?
Hmm.
And when I look at some of the AI pilots that I've seen firsthand, um, a lot of them are just trying to use AI, right? They hear we need AI, and so they're just like, well, we need AI. We're going to use AI. It's the
Just say it
same
over and
problem that I
over,
was
or
talking about before, right? They have
right,
this technology, but they don't know what to do with it. So
right.
they're just trying to like shove it in wherever they think it'll work. And that's rarely going to be successful. What's more successful is when there's a specific problem that you're trying to solve that AI would be a good candidate to help you fix, and go about it that way. One of the biggest challenges I've seen in integrating AI into existing corporations is that a lot of the data inside the company is not readily available to be able to do this, or it's not in the right formats to be able to do this. That's one of the challenges that we see. Another is trying a pilot but not really investing in the pilot, or not really understanding what the pilot is trying to help you to learn. That's one of the biggest challenge. That's the other big challenge that I see. Sorry, and I forgot the second part of your question.
Oh, just any unexpected or unintended consequences that you're seeing in your, being in Silicon Valley,
Yeah,
of AI implementation and kind of this race to just like shove AI into things
yeah,
across companies.
yeah. I think the other challenge, the unfortunate side effect is that a lot of folks are jumping to implement AI as a cost saving measure. Right, we want to eliminate jobs, because the I can, I just been promised by this AI company that I can replace this group of people with this AI for much less money. Um, and so what you see is that sometimes that's not the best solution, because those people have some legacy knowledge that's not encoded into any data that you can easily use. So that's one type of problem that we're starting to see. Um, Another is this kind of geez, how do I describe it? Mismatch of I guess I already said this about the needs and the expectations, and then what actually comes out of it. And
Hmm.
so jumping too quickly to this solution means that there's a lot lost in translation, and over trusting the AI to be able to give you accurate answers, and its lack of transparency means that decisions are sometimes I was just talking to somebody the other day that was using an AI to analyze their projections, their financial projections, and it had so badly overestimated, it hallucinated the numbers so badly, that they had heavily invested in an area that once they had a human go back and do the due diligence to check the AI's math, they realized that that number was irrational. And so they just put a ton of investment into an area that was guaranteed to make them crash because there was actually no reason to invest in that area.
Right.
So it's kind of over relying on an AI that's not fully developed yet to replace humans in a way that it really just is not capable of doing. That's been one
And
of the biggest challenges.
it's not funny in that case, but it's kind of ironic that it seems like a lot of the best moves or smartest moves are kind of the basic common sense moves, not like some brilliant idea, but like hey, figure out your problem before you go after a
Yeah.
solution. Be prudent about, how you do this. Uh, don't take AI accounting at face value. Is that accurate? Is it like it's, kind of the basic um type of diligence of running a company that is successful versus like those, you know, genius ideas that everyone really wants to have and put a feather in their cap?
Yeah, I'd say so. Um, it helps to be a little dubious about something that's going to completely, the snake oil kind
Right.
of situation, right? Like if it says it's magic, maybe be a little dubious first before you go full in on that.
And and that's hard because you also want to, you need to be naive and believe in the magic to create good innovation, but then like switch into like dubious mode and, being a bit of a curmudgeon, I guess, or at least have those people on the team who are able to interface effectively with each other and respectfully so that it carries that balance, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think the best way is to start with a pilot area where people are both excited and also questioning,
Hmm.
so that you can get the most benefit out of that experiment. What can you learn from it? What do you learn from what can you is it if it's not successful, how do you integrate those learnings back into the larger company? Not so that you can avoid ever going and using AI again, but so that next time you use AI, you have a set of learnings that you can say, okay, did we do these things that we didn't do last time? How can we mitigate these problems that we experienced last time, so that you can start to create the muscle to be able to do that. The other thing that I see as problematic in implementing AI in a lot of these companies is that the experience is not native to that company.
Hmm.
There's no reason why it would be.
Right.
And so trying to figure out how do you partner with folks that have the specialized experience, but yet know your industry or your business well enough to help you implement in an intelligent and responsible way, it becomes kind of one of the big challenges.
All of this sounds, very challenging to do, but also challenging from a cultural perspective. If you're the person in charge of this or on this team, it's a lot to manage expectations. And if things aren't going exactly according to plan, which why would they if it's true innovation? That's a lot on someone as talent at your company. Are there strategies for kind of mitigating burnout of the people who are getting this work done, or is it kind of just something that comes with the territory?
Both. It comes with the territory. As a innovator myself, I have um, experienced a lot of, okay, I gotta go. And
Yeah.
the burnout usually happens because the larger corporation can't incorporate the net new innovation. And you can only, bounce your head against the wall so many times before you say, oh, this isn't working. I need to move.
Hmm.
And so that's why I suggested this interior track for the innovators in your company that allows them to have pathways to graduation, to working on different types of problems. So and working in a more nimble way, so you avoid some of that burnout that people experience. I think another really good way to get more people involved in it and keeping the burnout low is by allowing for a revolving set of people to work on these innovation projects, but then allow them to be returned into the company, rather than like getting rid of them.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of different strategies.
Yeah. That makes sense of establishing a culture early before you maybe need to do any of this kind of innovation of entrepreneurship, which I think will only get more in demand as time goes on and exponential technologies continue to do what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, when how do you know when a project is, I mean, it's probably easy to tell if it's successful, if it's gaining market traction. How do you know when to or if to assimilate it back into the main organization? Um, it sounds like that's a challenge in and of itself of figuring that piece out.
Yeah. Well, I saw somebody mention in the comments that a lot of times, you'll see this in two ways. One, a company will buy a startup, and they because they want that innovation that startup is doing, and then suddenly, they come into that corporate culture and it just kills all of the magic that allowed that startup to exist in the first place, and uh, they all disappear, and the innovation that they created dies, or becomes just part of the existing system. And the other one is the internal people that develop something completely novel to the company that they don't have the muscles to bring to market, and they try to just integrate it in as if it's going to just magically somehow find seed in the existing marketplace. And so it really depends on the type of innovation that you've created. If it can help you to sustain your market, it's easy to incorporate it back into the larger corporation and move forward. When it is a completely novel thing that requires a net new market, um, it's a lot harder. And so you almost have to create either another division that again is working in this different way that allowed the innovation to come to market, or you need to spin it off, to create a subsidiary or something that feeds the larger corporation but is allowed to operate in a different way. But that's not to say that they need to stay that way forever, because a lot of these startups, you'll see this happen in startup culture, where a startup will create some amazing thing because their culture is kind of chaos,
Mhm.
right? And it works at a 20-person startup or even a 50-person startup. But then it gets to this point where that chaos is, you know, detrimental to productivity, and it needs that muscle of the larger corporation and the sustaining structures of that corporation, especially things like HR and reward structures, things like that. And so it's really about the size and the where you are in market adoption, right? If you've gone past your first customer, right? Your first customer is, it's usually a lot of back and forth between that first customer and yourself trying to figure out the right thing. And then the first market tends to be a very small market, but has and a lot more co-creating with that first market. And then when it starts
Mhm.
to grow that first market, that's usually when it needs to either come into the company or be its own company. That's usually when the transition part needs to happen, but usually people try to do it at first market to integrate it, and that's usually when it doesn't work very well.
Right, right. Well, we have a ton of great audience questions coming in, so I
I
want to
know, I've seen
transition
them, they
over
look
to
great.
that. Yeah, so I'll start with the ones that are in the Q&A, and then we'll get to the ones that are in the chat. How long before you see companies that are structured with AI agents as employees, hiring AI agents basically before hiring human employees? Is that here already, or are we months or years away from that being a reality?
Kind of depends on a lot of factors that affect that. It depends on the business type of business that you do, the type of employees that you have. But I would say a lot of companies already have AI agents in their mix. They're either it's some pilot or something that they're working with, or some tool to help a department to be more efficient or more productive. Um, and so we're already, and you mentioned earlier, Cody, that a lot of us are using AI in our day-to-day work, uh, in a way to help us to do more, or to make our tasks a little more efficient or more effective. And so we're already starting to see this uh, augment AI augmentation of the workforce today, right? Even within existing companies. Um, and there's a lot of restructuring happening where maybe things like, some of the more rote activities that maybe you had to hire an assistant to take care of for your day is already being replaced by an AI that can do that task more efficiently and 24/7, 7 days a week, right? Like, um, so we're already starting to see that. But when are we going to start replacing entire departments? I don't know. I don't really see AI as a full replacement of humans. I don't. I think that's a faulty mental model, and it will cause a lot of problems. But uh, the type of people that you're going to need is going to change, because you can have an AI that can take on some of the skill sets that we had traditionally expected humans to have. Um, so I'm not saying that I'm saying it likely won't be, oh, we're going to replace all these humans with these things, but instead we're going to have to hire different types of humans,
Hmm.
and use these AIs to help us. I'm not sure if that answers the person's question, but
I
uh,
think that's as much as you can answer at
yeah.
this moment in
And I would say
history.
it's about
Right.
5 to 10 years before we see the types of AI at work that we've all been hearing about.
Right. Right. Um, this next one is I think a three-parter, so I'll try to get it all out clearly. One, is there a dominant mindset that companies need to have to be able to run your business and reinvent it at the same time? Two, what kind of disciplined actions should companies make to achieve this duality? And then three, can you recommend a body of knowledge and or community around this work that would be helpful for ongoing research and learning?
Hmm. Okay, so from the mindset standpoint, you have to have the C-suite bought in. They have to be on board 100% with this idea of radical innovation. Um, and you have to work hard to ensure that this C-suite or your senior staffing um, is coming along on the journey. A lot of times when this the C-suite OKs and disruptive innovation group, they don't keep up with the learnings of that group, so that you have to keep them apprised and in the loop. And in terms of like their mindset that they have to have, it's really accepting that disruptive innovation is going to fail all the metrics, and that's why it's so important to bring them along on your journey, is so that they can have the the proper criteria to evaluate the success or failure of something.
Hmm.
And so the mindset has to be, we are willing and on board to allow for this incubation to exist alongside this large corporation, um, and know that those are going to be moving at different speeds and with different types of gates to get through. Yeah. I'm sorry, the second part of the question?
Second part was what types of disciplined actions do companies need to make to achieve the duality of business as usual and disruptive innovation?
Yeah. So I think, that you part of it is this mindset of, okay, well, in order to be working in a disruptive area, we have to be willing to break things, to fail, um, to always be documenting our learnings, always be communicating, not just within that disruptive group, but across the company, because you want to foster people inside your company that can then bring you these types of things. And so, fostering a learn fast kind of mentality, allowing for things like hackathons or you know experiment days, allowing for staff that can work on demand and cycle through this kind of disruptive mindset becomes really important. Now, you don't want your entire company thinking disruptively about everything. So then you also need to make it a safe place for that to happen. And then areas where, okay, we got to buckle down here. So it's having
Right.
that duality of thinking that's really necessary.
And then the last part was, is there a body of knowledge and or community that you could recommend out there for continuing to figure this stuff out? Obviously, Singularity.
Yes, I would say Singularity. Singularity is one of my favorite places for this kind of content. I think it's also, I don't know about, in other communities, but I know here and on the East Coast, a lot of the really innovative folks at these corporations tend to attend a lot of meetups,
Hmm.
kind of community building around kind of this innovation culture, um, attending those types of things. But I think one of the best ways is really by paying attention to, folks that that gather around places like SU, because even
Hmm.
not I'm not talking about the SU experts. I'm talking about the community around it, because that's where I found the uh most enthusiastic innovators has been in this SU ecosystem for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that the executive program cohorts have WhatsApp groups that are active for 3, 4, 5 years or more,
Yeah.
still discussing this kind of stuff. So it's yeah, that's really cool. This next question I think came in when you had your manufacturing example, but it was a question of do we have to break down existing tech infrastructure and processes to be able to compete with greenfield like AI era companies like break down and rebuild, or is like are we able to retrofit? I mean, I think there's probably a big CapEx question here as well.
Mhm.
And maybe it depends on your industry or your company.
Yeah, unfortunately, it really depends on your industry or company. But I do think that there's going to be, I don't think we're going to have a choice in that we have to break
Hmm.
down existing structures. It's going to be forced upon us. We can't, when we start to move into this AI era, the ways the standard operating procedure is just not going to work.
Right.
And so, yeah, structures are going to need to be dismantled and reinvented in different ways. Retrofitting works in certain areas, where maybe uh, equipment costs, or those hard investments, the actual hard investments such as property or machinery or things like this is going to take longer. It always takes longer.
Right.
Whereas internal, more, I'd say, knowledge work type of things can evolve a little bit easier and more quickly and more nimbly. So, yeah, I think both structures are going to evolve by
Yeah.
necessity. You're not going to have a
Yeah.
choice.
The choice will be clear.
The choice will be clear.
Do you think that good innovation requires a more diverse team, so not mostly engineers, but people from different academic and professional backgrounds? If no, why not? If yes, which backgrounds, what's the best mix for creating good innovation?
Obviously, it depends on what industry you're in, but the most successful innovation teams that I've seen have a nice bouquet of interests and skill sets. So you have more, uh, to use the IDEO mental phrasing, more T-shaped or Z-shaped people. Um, so people that can go deep in one area, but can talk broadly about a lot of different things with a lot of different people. And so I found that innovation is best done with a group of unique thinkers from
Hmm.
different disciplines, because if you're only looking in one discipline for a solution, it makes it much more difficult and much more unstable. Whereas if you're thinking more broadly, you can bring all kinds of different perspectives to bear on this innovation. You can move much more fast and much more nimbly. So I think it's better to have a portfolio of skill sets than isolating to like only
Yeah.
engineers get to work on this, right? And the skill sets, it really depends on your industry. So when I do this, I often like to bring in my wild cards. So I bring in people that are not from our industry, that actually don't care about our industry. They've been working in something else, and can bring that perspective in. So people that are coming with a novice mindset
Hmm.
into the field, also bringing in people that are in a lot of my work. I bring in folks like anthropologists, people that really look differently at the market, not from a market standpoint, but from a
Human
people
needs.
perspective. Yeah, human
Yeah.
needs perspective, right? And so I find that that really helps a lot. You also want somebody who's good at storytelling, because that storytelling is going to help you to create a vision both for yourselves and for the larger company to be able to understand and locate this idea in the bigger picture of things.
Right. Uh, we see a number of legacy businesses trying to buy startups, but it often feels like they're just trying to find a quick fix for their existing model and maybe not truly disruptive. And the question is, how do you cultivate or have a truly like open mind when it comes to taking any approach, whether it's buying a startup or creating innovation within. It's just I think it's a comment on like how difficult it is to kind of have an open mind when you're in the day to day of a kind of entrenched organization. What are some tactics around that that you've seen work? Maybe
Really,
take a
it's,
vacation.
yeah. Well, I think it really is this C-suite buy-in that
Hmm.
that has to be there. Uh, that's kind of cultivating. That's a and they by and the reason I say that is because there has to be an infrastructure created specifically for this type of disruptive innovation group. Um,
Do you
I
think that includes, sorry, do you think that includes if it's M&A, like
Yeah,
making those M&A choices? Same thing.
yes, that's exactly what I mean. It has to
Yeah.
be a whole nother, like it has to be a business within the business in order to survive, and it has to have its own set of rules and criterias that it's working against. Um, that isn't to say that you isolate that group of people, uh, because that can become really problematic when you're trying
Hmm.
to get the larger company to move in that direction. You almost need everybody to buy in to allow the company to move in the new direction that you want things to go into. So having the mentality of we're all innovators here, and allowing for people to cycle in and out of that kind of substructure within the larger structure allows for the entire company to start to sort of embrace the idea of moving in that direction. So I think it's a little bit of move fast, break things, learn a lot, and incorporate those learnings back into the company. Like take the learnings that are happening in the subset and make it digestible to other divisions in the group, even if they're working on existing market problems. They need to learn from what this group is doing, and that keeps the communication going back and forth. So you kind of have to have this like risky nurture, like both nurturing and risky feeling in this subgroup, and allow for cultural exchange, for lack of a better phrase, with the larger company. I'm not sure if that's getting to the answer, but that's what I've seen.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on mitigating job loss? I think we're starting to see some at least slower job growth, especially entry level, at least in white collar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thoughts on that and the trends there.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face is in re-educating and reskilling folks to be able to participate in the net new sets of jobs and capabilities that we're seeing emerge. So ensuring that your internal um, education is allowing for people to find that kind of mobility by providing courses and trainings that allow for an expanded skill set, net new skill sets, those types of things helps to mitigate job loss, because if you can train them to do a different job within the organization, that's great, right? If you can train them to actually be the harbingers of some of these things, then that becomes really important. But there are going to be job losses. It's just the nature of how this in any of the socioeconomic revolutions that happen, it's inevitable, because jobs change. Now, I mean, you got to look at. I think a lot of people are fearful that AI workers are going to replace all humans, and in fact, I think some of the companies, such as OpenAI, have openly stated that that's one of their goals. But I will tell you that as a student of the Industrial Revolution and the subsequent eras of it, what we've seen is that while there are job profiles that disappear, net new profiles occur, that actually become bigger and more important to that company. And so that's why I'm talking about the reskilling and the retraining, both
Hmm.
internally and providing for external learnings, is going to be really important, because as a corporation, you may not understand what's out there in the world. And it helps to bring these folks that are already loyal to you outside so that they can bring those learnings back in. That's one thing. And in fact, there's I believe it was Accenture Chicago. Not sure it was. I'm pretty sure it was them that created a system where if you automated yourself out of a job, they guaranteed that they would train you for a new job within the company. And so that was one way that they were
Nice.
trying to mitigate the job losses. Of course,
That's
it's not
amazing.
going to solve everything, but it does.
Right. I know we only have a couple minutes left here, and there's still a bunch of questions, so I'll try to get to one or two more. This next one is very specific. Call it a bit of a case study, and I'm just curious to hear your response to it. So, take that how you will. But any recommendations for a two-person team within a 140 person company that's trying to basically convert the company from being service-based to a product SaaS company?
Hmm.
Tips and tricks.
I mean, that's a tough one. I have so many questions, follow-up questions. Uh,
I guess where would you start? Maybe those questions
okay.
are the best answer. Like, what would your follow-up questions be about approaching that?
Do you have buy-in from the C-suite? That's a big question. Um, why do you want to move to a product base as opposed to service base? What are you seeing that is um, for really involving yourselves in this, um, or being your conviction that product would be a better solution? Um, and I think the other question is, why is there only two? What can you Are you working with other teams? Can you start? One way that I would imagine is starting by communicating with other groups within the company and starting to see if there's ways that you can get people on board with that idea, in order to kind of grow the seed, get, spread the virus amongst the folks. Yeah, what kind of funding are you getting from your? I have so many questions. Yeah, I have others. Working with other
This
teams
is
currently. Yeah, yeah, I see it.
this gives me an idea. Maybe I can
Maybe we can
gather from
connect,
you a
Nicole.
list of
Yeah,
questions.
yeah. Maybe we can email each other, Nicole.
Yeah, and I think it'd be great to have like Jody's list of questions before starting innovation, right? Like,
Yeah, we can work
I
on that
think
too.
that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
So I know we're out of time. We're actually a little bit over time, and there's a bunch more questions here. Thank you, everyone, for your incredible participation and engagement in this. I would be remiss not to mention that Jody will be at our April executive program in Silicon Valley. And I think you'll also be at our Middle East executive program in Dubai in
Yes.
May.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking for a global perspective on this type of thinking and training, check out our executive program at su.org. And if you're specifically looking for like a Middle East lens, look at joining us in Dubai. Again, su.org. All the information is there, and you can meet Jody in person and have many more of these conversations. So.
There's so much more to talk about. I can't even tell you. But this has been really fun, Cody, and everybody. Thank you so much for your questions and tuning in.
Yeah, thank you for being here. We will make the recording available. We'll get an email out to you within a day or so here. And yeah, thanks Jody for joining. I always wish that we could talk for much more than an hour. I
Yeah.
know we have busy schedules and stuff, but it's always super fun. So thanks
Yep. Thanks a
everyone.
lot.
Really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Bye bye.